Hi everyone, Vice Chancellor, colleagues. Well, I'm a lecturer in sociology with the School of Social Sciences, and I've been heavily involved in teaching sociology units. And my approach to teaching sociology has always been an inductive one. So I've always implied inductive learning strategies. However, when I was then approached to blend the units that I'm actually teaching, so I was supposed to develop a blended learning plan, and I had to think about how do I actually now make sure that I remain true to the inductive learning pedagogies and blend the unit and have the same outcomes at the end. So then I've started talking with the blended learning team with the school, and of course we've explored some options in terms of how this could be done. And we decided to actually utilize online group journals to enable inductive pedagogical approach to teaching sociology. So it's very important for me to talk a little bit about the pedagogy that I'm actually using in teaching sociology. So I do want to talk very briefly about what inductive pedagogy is. So inductive pedagogy is really based on the claim that knowledge is built from the learner's experiences and interactions with the phenomenon, or more specifically, by presenting a student with a specific challenge for them to analyze and solve with facts, skills, and conceptual understanding. So first of all, it's a student-driven learning process, and I'm very heavily committed to this, that all learning processes which I implement in my units are actually student-driven learning processes, and that academics present students with a challenge. And that challenge comes in the form of employing purposeful ambiguity and providing constructive formative criticism. So inductive pedagogies mark a definitive break away from the positivist and deductive models of teaching. So how did I adopt inductive pedagogy in teaching sociology? So the very aim of adopting inductive pedagogy in teaching sociology is to assist students to realize their potential of becoming independent critical thinkers while heightening their sociological perspective. So what that would actually mean for the unit that I teach is I ask students to engage with critical self-reflection and inquiry-guided learning processes. So let's just briefly talk about critical self-reflection. So the critical self-reflection improves students' critical thinking skills as well as develops self-knowledge. What it requires is the utilization of distinct quality of mind, which for sociology is the sociological imagination. So it's very important for me to emphasize that in sociology and teaching sociology, this kind of approach is consistent with a humanistic sociology, which means it actually positions the actor or the subject at the center of the analytical stage. So the students are driving this process, and it actually puts them at the center stage of this learning experience. The emphasis is on examination of the subjective experiences and the objective conditions. We pay close attention to the phenomena of human consciousness and the meaning, as well as it leads actors, in this particular case, students, to behave in line with the humanistic principles. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned this here because it's very much in line in how I approach teaching, of course, sociology. Perhaps may not be as relevant with the other disciplines. When it comes to the inquiry-guided learning is a student-centered learning process that includes questioning, investigation, interpretation, and guidance. So the teacher is not the absolute owner of the right answer or the expert. Rather, the student actually engages in co-creation of knowledge. So there are three ways to practice critical self-reflection as per the literature, of course. There's free reflection, the reflection accompanied by questions, which I've implemented in teaching the health sociology unit, and there is structured reflection, which we kind of didn't go in that direction, really. So we kept it at reflection accompanied by questions, which allows a degree of freedom, but it still provides it needs a good scaffolding and support from the teaching team in the unit. So, critical self-reflection in teaching of my unit, the health sociology unit. So we've got, two distinct assessments which are actually directly employ this particular pedagogy, which is assessment 1, critical self-reflective online journals, and assessment 3, which is the final analytical reflexive essay. It's very important for me to emphasize that these actually assessments are very closely linked. What students are doing as part of their first assessment actually leads into their final analytical reflexive essay. How this is done is that they've actually logged in critical self-reflective posts on a weekly basis in the online reflective journals, and we provide on a weekly basis formative feedback. So we're not actually assessing their posts, we are providing formative feedback, and then they become sort of mini experts. They engage with the theme or the phenomena or the social phenomena, and they are actually formulating, once when develop a really consistent and a particular interest in a topic, they develop their essay question that they will write their essay at the very end. So just to revisit this actually, critical self-reflective online journal, we're asking students to actually post at least 4 online critical reflective posts or entries. This is done in the duration of 4 weeks. What we do then, at the end of every week, we provide extensive, and when I say extensive, I actually do mean that, formative feedback by the relevant teaching staff. So what we have one of our teaching members actually is reading the posts, practically all the posts. It's not a big unit, so it is a doable task. So it's reading the posts, critical self-reflective entries, and we are providing feedback. Sometimes this can be as long as like 4 or 5 pages. But it's actually posted on the group online journals. So each of the students can read to it, and they can further develop in posting their next online journal entries. And finally, they can develop their essay question as well. So at the end of this exercise of weekly postings, we are actually asking students to submit summaries, which are critical self-reflective summaries, which is a more coherent document, which is then assessed. So just to clarify that, while students are posting online, they're not actually being assessed. What we are providing is formative feedback, so they can further develop their analytical skills. It is only at the end of the 4 weeks, the 5 weeks, where we ask students to put what they're reflecting on in a more coherent document. And of course, we've got a format for it, which is the reflective summary, and this is what we are assessing. The assessment 3, which is the final analytical reflective essay, is written, once again, I'm reiterating, on the question that they've developed themselves. So through this process of weekly online entries, where they're using the format of questioning or problematicizing about a particular phenomenon or social issue, and I'll actually show you an example later on. They would question, they would address the question, they would engage with literature, but also very important, it needs to be an element of personalization. So they would have to reflect, and that's in line with the humanistic sociology, really, approach. So let me just now show you how we've actually done assessment 1, which is critical self-reflective online journal. So the challenge, once again, I had to present students with a challenge, to actually claim that I am implementing an inductive learning process, isn't it? So what was the challenge? There needed to be a degree of ambiguity to it, and the challenge was that we've actually created, let me just, students had a choice of 10, is this viewable? I am. Students actually had a choice of 10 thematic journals to sign up. So we've given that choice, but what we've actually done, we haven't actually locked these thematic journals into a particular theme, which is very narrow. What we've actually done, each of these thematic journals were linked to a very active, either social media site or a website. So we're asking them to sign up for the topic, and this is what they're doing. We've got an online sign-up link. We're not actually manually, distributing you into group. The choice is there. Whichever they find most appealing, they sign up for, and what they do for the duration of 4 or 5 weeks, at least for the purposes of assignment 1. And of course, later on, they can do it, they can still remain true to that task, towards writing their final analytic essay. We're asking them to follow what's happening on that particular social media site. We're asking them to reflect on what they're reading. We're asking them to engage the literature and see what, how they're understanding about, their own positioning, about their own thinking and, behaving. It's kind of influenced by what they're seeing there. Are they changing their thoughts? But this needs to be done in terms of, once again, questioning and then addressing that and so forth. So, when they start actually, one of the sites that I want to use, just so I can demonstrate this, is the Provider website. For example, this is a health sociology unit, of course, and we have actually, so our teaching team have selected 10 social media sites which are, of course, focused on health-related issues. So, one of the social media sites is the Provider Facebook account. So what we asked for students to do is to actually follow what these posts are about, what these women are actually talking about. And because this is a public forum as well, they can just as well engage, on this particular social media site. So then they reflect on a weekly basis about what they've read, what has sparked their interest. So out of these broad topics, as they reflect, they would develop a particular narrow focus about what's most appealing, to them from this, what has resonated with them. And they would then focus, as the more focused they become, the more engaged and the deeper the analysis is, and they would be able to then, at the end of this exercise, formulate an essay question that they would write their essay for their last assignment. So, to go back on my presentation now, and these sites are very active, by the way. We've got a couple of postings on a daily basis, and students had a lot to work with. Okay, so that's the choice of 10 topical online group journals, as I said. So they would, of course, they would be very dedicated in following of the development. So, and the development for the students would mean that they're developing as kind of a mini experts, right? So what they're actually putting online is their own knowledge. They're creating knowledge. It's not us actually telling them, just regurgitate what was in that article or what was in that reading. So what we actually did is made sure that they're being very well supported. So what we've done is the following. So we have provided, as I said, quite an extensive feedback on a weekly basis, and this can actually be seen just at this side here. So as the students will progress, will do their weekly entries actually, then our teaching staff will follow very closely how they're developing. And they would start off, with a particular standard of reflection, of course. As we provide feedback, they would further develop their critical and self-reflective skills. So you would actually see here how we've done, a global feedback for week 2. Usually it's actually being, made available to students at the end of that particular teaching week. And then students will once again go through a week of reflection, and then we will provide third global feedback, and then 1 week of reflection, and we would provide the global feedback for week 4. So at the end of it, I said they would produce a more holistic document which they would submit for assessment after they've had a chance to engage with the feedback that we are providing. So it's not a summative feedback and an assessment at the very end. It's actually, we are making sure that they develop and they become these mini experts throughout the process. Okay, so I just wanted to actually provide you with a quote, in terms of how we provided global feedback or formative feedback, and how students can, how students perhaps would have been able to benefit from it. So this is directly from one of the formative feedback posts. First of all, we heavily focused on the fact that a lot of students, we have invited students to personalize, of course, these reflections. So we've paid particular attention of how students have actually done that. So, and we acknowledge the fact that, you know, some of the students have chosen to reflect upon difficult personal circumstances for themselves in your postings. So we were actually, you know, our focus was in that direction because a lot of what they were saying, you know, they would actually reflect on, you know, the experiences in particular about survivorship about a cancer survivor and their family, for example. And some of this needed to be really carefully managed. So we would acknowledge their, you know, of course, their contribution, but we also need to provide, you know, a bit of guidance in terms of how this needs to, you know, just from a personal reflection, then be taken to an analytical, you know, reflection. So we've specifically paid attention to how they would engage with the theories and the material that we are teaching at lectures as well. So they need to be able to see the relevance of what we are teaching to these experiences, you know, when they're engaging with particular social phenomena. So we made sure that in every global feedback, we reflect on their engagement on the theoretical content of the relevant week. And also, finally, not final, but second last is, we made sure that they understand this process is an ongoing process where they would develop their critical consideration of topics and they would question and problematicize. We needed to actually further, you know, kind of endorse and constantly support that development about, you are the co-producers of knowledge here. We are not the ultimate experts. Please make sure that you problematicize things, you bring it to the forefront, you address it, you engage with literature and so forth. It's a developmental process rather than a summative process. And finally, we've actually emphasized with them that with this, you're kind of becoming a mini expert, of course. I've mentioned this on several times, but once when they feel comfortable with the knowledge and they've actually dug fairly deep in terms of you know, kind of understanding the complexities about the social phenomena of their choice, that they will be able to write that final analytical essay, you know, quite well. So we've emphasized that you are the knowledge co-creators as well, and it's about you becoming knowledgeable in this particular area. So this is the kind of feedback that we provided, and of course we used some examples, you know, kind of we reflected on particular posts and so forth. So I just wanted to give you an example about how this actually played out what we were asking students to do and how we were supported actually was taken up by the students. So this is a direct quote from one of the students. My initial internet research on Parker was filled with positivity and well wishes from the public for the young boy and his family. This elation at people's optimism was short-lived as I came across an article written by his mom and so forth. So clearly this is a personal reflection. They're reflecting personally, this is my experience, I'm reading this. I first had these positive thoughts, however, I now realize, you know, there's something problematic. Then there is the questioning. If people perceive a disabled person in the spotlight as the flavor of the month, what does this say about their views as disabled persons in society? So this is about problematizing things, questioning. And finally, some of the, of course, I didn't include the whole post, you know, just, you know, kind of a part of the course, but then, you know, the student moves into analysis. These views adopted by many in society and perpetuated by medical professionals are dangerous for people with disabilities, and awareness is severely lacking with public perceptions, and then literature was used, you know, to actually further analyze. So, what we wanted to do is actually see whether this works. So myself and my colleagues that are on the research team, which is Paul Parker, who is in the audience today, Andreas Kusavara and Dr. Annette Mullen, we've actually wanted to see whether what we are doing is actually going to work for the students and whether we are eliciting, you know, those, you know, students' engagement to a level where they co-produce knowledge, where they, kind of engage quite successfully in inquiry-guided learning and so forth. So what we put together is a research project to evaluate what we're actually doing. So currently we've actually run it through the ethics, and we are commencing with our research end of this month, which is really the evaluation of our pedagogy and the allowances of the online journals to see what we've actually achieved. So the overall aim of the research is to explore the usefulness and the effectiveness of technology-enabled learning in the implementation of the inductive learning pedagogy towards teaching sociology. In particular, of course, we are focusing on this unit. So the research questions are as follows. What are the perceived and actual academic benefits for students in adopting inductive pedagogies in teaching undergraduate sociology? And second, in what ways and to what extent did the placement of online journals in group spaces within the unit as view site enable consistent learning with the inductive learning pedagogy? So the focus is twofold. We are actually asking about students' experiences in terms of what do you think about the inductive learning approach? And second, what are the allowances? Do you think that what we've actually used online as an e-tool allowed for this kind of learning? And this is the very last slide, of course. I just want to show you some of the research questions that we are actually using. Just one moment. Okay. We've already developed a folder in the view site, and we've actually got this is going to be an online, of course, facilitated research, and students can actually participate in it. So the survey questions are as follows. We have a quantitative as well as a qualitative aspect to evaluating these teaching strategies. So we're asking questions like, students need to, of course, use the scale to say, I agree to this extent and so forth. Learning activities for assessment 1 develop my ability to learn independently. So they need to say, to what extent they agree with that, which is focused on the inductive learning pedagogy, and then the allowance of the tool. The group online reflective journal activities enabled me to independently drive my learning for assessment 1. Just another 2 examples from the questions, and I'm more than happy to talk, or Paul can actually talk more about that, when we mingle later if you've got questions. So another question will be, I was able to actively engage with and investigate a social phenomenon of choice. So emphasis on the choice here. They do have a choice. The group online reflective journal activities enabled me to actively engage with and investigate a social phenomena. And finally, I just wanted to give you an example here. About the guidance, we are asking students whether the guidance is useful. So they need to, kind of tell us to what extent they found the guidance provided for assessment 1 in a form of weekly formative feedback or global feedback provided by the tutors in week 3, 4, 5, and 6 to be accessible, useful, and supportive. And I found that the group online reflective journal enabled provision of guidance that was accessible, useful, and supportive. So we'll see what the students think about this. Well, that's it, really. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Irina. I think that was a really good example of, scaffolding and assessment, and by providing that formative feedback right at the beginning, what you're actually doing is sort of capturing a profile of your students as well, and also maybe students that are struggling or that aren't probably on track. For example, early warning kind of thing, capturing them early and getting them back on track, and almost ensuring their success towards the end when it comes to the major assessment. Does anyone have any questions for
Okay, there were group online journals, so students need to actually sign up, for whichever group they wanted. So all the postings were available for the students who sign up for that particular journal. We had 10. We had approximately around somewhere between 5 and 7 students enrolling for each of the online journals. We strongly also recommend that the students read each other's reflections. And if they want to build upon a particular reflection, that will be lovely. And students have actually taken up on that, and they've been reflecting on each other's as well.
How many students?
It's not a big unit. It's actually, we're sitting on 72 enrollments at the moment, and we have 2 teaching staff members on the unit. So yes, the formative feedback does require quite a lot of dedication and quite a lot of time. So we are managing within 2, just because the unit, I think, is fairly, it's not really small, but it's not a big, large unit. For example, I would imagine whether this would probably be a challenge for a unit of 1,500 enrollments or 700 enrollments.
You've already taught it last year, I suppose.
This is the very first year where we've blended
This semester, you mean?
Yeah, this semester. Up until last year, I've always taught sociology, by implementing an inductive learning pedagogy. Up until last year, I was actually asking the students to go and do a community-based learning exercise, and this was the way in which they were, inquiry guided and so forth, and then bring back and report and write an interview report, for example. Whereas this was the first year when the blended learning plan was approved and I had to blend it. So we've resolved that this is perhaps a way forward. We really want to see what the students are saying.
It looks really interesting, and I'm sure with engaged students will work beautifully. How would it work with the students that are not?
Well, I do need to say 2 things in regards to that. The first one is, when I was actually reading the literature about, online tools, allowances, and how they're utilized towards enabling inductive learning pedagogies, some of the colleagues, America, which are based in America, who's worked with this, wrote in their publication saying, the first, there was like, oh my God, there's so much work. There was students were not particularly, kind of happy to take up this exercise, which is quite a prolonged and kind of a consistent task. However, at the end of it, they've seen the value of it. So this is what my colleagues, American-based colleagues, are actually saying and utilizing this. But on another note, I think, and just building on your Gina's also comment before, we are actually being able to depict students who are not engaging as well. And we are able, with this provision of formative feedback and continued reading, we're able to go to the student, not go to the student, but sometimes in a way that we put it in the global feedback, say, okay, well, there are, kind of, perhaps you need to look at this and that. And many times, my colleague who is running the face-to-face tutorials, actually, she takes it to the class, she discusses about what needs to happen and so forth. So I think in terms of risk management, we are actually able to depict very easily who is engaged and who's not. And I think we can be proactive in terms of bringing the students back on the table and, kind of further developing. You can see I'm very enthusiastic about that.
Thank you so much, Irena. We've run out of time, but you'll be around at the end of the forum for networking.
Actually, I do have to leave. I do apologize, but Paul is here. He's remaining, and he's part of the research team, and he is he is in a position to respond to all the questions.
Thank you so much, Irena. I really appreciate it.